sisters and brothers. It's great to be with you. That was Nigun Mitzpeh by Shlomo Katz. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. By the way, I just heard something so awesome today. If you look at the flame there in our wisdom candle, a question sometimes is asked: if you see Jews praying, certainly if you came by our minyan in the morning or in the evening, and when people are praying and they're really getting into it, especially in the silent prayer, whether they're sitting or standing, they start moving like I'm moving, back and forth, back and forth. People are really into it. But this back and forth motion is called shuckling, right? Shuckling. And so various explanations have been given for why it is that Jews really sway with their bodies back and forth, sometimes side to side, but more back and forth than anything. But the greatest one that I've heard, I just read today, it says in the Zohar, right? So the foundational text of Jewish mysticism, that just as it says, I believe in Proverbs, that the soul, the human soul, is the candle of God. It might be in Psalms, not in Psalms or Proverbs. I don't have the quote right now in terms of chapter and verse. But at any rate, it says in the Bible that the human soul is the candle of God. So when that soul is lit up, right, and when we're praying, hopefully our souls are lit up. So then it's waving like a flame, right? Like a candle flame in the breeze. Isn't that gorgeous when you're so involved in prayer that your soul is lit up like the flame of God's candle? Beautiful, beautiful image. Who is with us as we get it going on a Wednesday night? Wow, we're past the middle of the week. Good Shabbos, we can say with great sincerity and enthusiasm, just 2 days away from Shabbos. And we have announced the Shabbos Challenge. It was a post earlier today on both the Accidental Talmudist page and on the Accidental Talmudist Forum. By the way, if you're not a member of the Accidental Talmudist Forum, you should join. Because if you're part of a Facebook group, you're just much more likely to see our content. Groups are prioritized these days. So just find Accidental Talmudist Forum. You have to ask to join us, but we approve everybody that's a real account. We just try to weed out phony, bot type accounts. At any rate, we shared the Shabbos challenge, so we've made this up. And the idea is, we're challenging you. Do a little more. Do a little more, right? If you're not Jewish, unplug. Just unplug for 25 hours from sunset on Friday until nightfall on Saturday. It is such a beautiful reset for your soul, the candle of God. You'll benefit in enormous ways, and we even posted some ideas of what you can do with all your newfound time when you're not on social media and reading all the bad news and TikTok and this, that, and this, that, and that's that. All the different stuff we waste time on when you just turn off the technology, reconnect with your loved ones. If God willing, they're in town and you can do that directly. But get away from the technology, get away from the car, get away from spending money, and just have an unplugged Shabbos. And if you're Jewish, so unplug and maybe even a little more, maybe light Shabbos candles if you haven't done that. Maybe make a kiddush over the wine on Friday night, or grape juice is just as good. Make it a kosher wine if possible. To challenge yourself to do a little more. Here we are learning Torah every day, but Torah learning that doesn't lead to action in our lives, leaves a little something to be desired. Now, Torah study itself is action. It's a tremendous mitzvah. It's the biggest mitzvah of all, but still it should lead to other mitzvahs. So the Shabbos challenge, join us starting this week. Okay, who's with us as we get it going on a Wednesday? Stephen in New Hampshire, Tom in PA, Randy in Florida, Melissa in New York, John in Maine, James in Indianapolis, Jill in Illinois, Bill in Berkeley, Pauline in Arkansas, Sharon in Cape May, Patrice in Utah, Armia, I'm sure I'm saying it wrong and I apologize, but Armia Ladsak Satyo LPT, in the Philippines. Welcome, Armia. Great to have you with us. PK in Colorado. Randy asking, please say a Mishaberach, a prayer for the healing of Yisraela Bas Leah Matla, or Matla. So may we only hear good news. May she have a complete recovery of body, mind, spirit, a complete healing. And we say Amen for Yisraela. Paula in the great Northwest, Annie in Michigan, Christo in Lubbock, Rebecca in LA, Paula in Chicago, Jennifer in Florida. Thank you, Bill, for the quote. I guess it must be the soul is the candle of God, must be Proverbs 20:27. Thank you. You're right on that. Lois in Omaha, Ann in Merced, Ginny outside Atlanta, Stephen in Oklahoma, Ryan, I think I'm late, but Lila Tov, and Baruch Hashem to everybody from Jacksonville, Florida. Paula loves this line, the candle of the Almighty. I'm just going to keep going with the hellos. Leah says, Amen. Stephen in Tallahassee. Sue in Skokie. Bryn is shuckling along in Boston. Nancy in North Carolina. Michael in Scranton. All right, let's get this class going. Also, Neil in Virginia. Seraphim in Sacramento. Zelig in Boston. And Gigi in British Columbia over on the YouTube side. Okay. This is so much fun. We're going to make our own little digression inspired by this daf. So on today's page, we're going to be reading about gold, right? So specifically, we learned in our Mishna, where are we? We're on page 45, Memhe, of Tractate Yoma. These are the laws of Yom Kippur. We're in chapter 4. We're discussing the third Mishnah of chapter 4. And the Mishnah stated that on Yom Kippur, the high priest uses a special coal pan made out of gold, unlike the coal pan used the rest of the year, which is made out of silver. But on Yom Kippur, it's a special coal pan. It's made out of gold. He takes coals from the outer altar, and he's going to use those coals to bring them into the Holy of Holies and place the incense, the super finely ground incense. It's ground very fine every day of the year, super fine on Yom Kippur. But with regard to this gold coal pan, so now the Gemara is going to tell us a little bit about, well, what type of gold? Because the Mishnah also said that every other day of the year there were gold vessels used in the temple, but they were of a greenish gold. And on Yom Kippur, they had the extra special golden vessels, which are a reddish gold. And so what's the story with this reddish gold versus the greenish gold? And the Gemara is going to tell us that there are 7 kinds of gold. And the source for these 7 kinds of gold is going to be the first book of Kings, chapter 10, which talks about the early days of King Solomon's reign, when he gets into power, and right away, I mean, the kingdom and the king just prosper tremendously. Wealth is coming in from all sides. Solomon takes years, but he's able to build the temple in the most magnificent manner. And tribute is pouring in from the surrounding kingdoms. And along with that tribute comes quite a bit of gold. So that's why the Gemara is going to look to that section to talk about different types of gold, right? You know, King Solomon was so flush in gold that there are different kinds of gold mentioned in that chapter. Well, I went over and took a look at chapter 10 of the first book of Kings, and one of the tributes that comes in from another monarch, a foreign monarch, is the Queen of Sheba. And this is a very, very interesting passage that I must say I was not very familiar with. We read the entire Torah every year. We certainly read passages from the writings. The writings we see all the time, right, in terms of Psalms and Proverbs. And there's other places we read the prophets, a fair amount, Isaiah, Jeremiah. But the book of Kings, which is so filled with amazing stories, not all of us have read it straight through. I did read it straight through in college, okay, because I took an English class in university where we read the entire Bible as a work of literature. But that was a long time ago. So it was fun to get into this chapter 10 and learn about the Queen of Sheba and actually really do it justice. We should get into chapter 9. So I thought we would. Chapter 9 is a little long, so we won't read all of it, but we'll start at the beginning of First Book of Kings, chapter 9. And it was when Solomon had finished building the temple of the Lord, the king's palace, and all Solomon's desire that he wished to make. So we tune in after Solomon has become king, has levied all the money that he needs and received everything that he needs, and he has manifested, he has realized the grand ambition of his father, King David, to build a house for the Lord in Jerusalem. So that's where we are. The temple has been built, and by the way, so has the palace that Solomon occupies. And the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time as he had appeared to him in Gibeon. And the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your petition, which you have petitioned before me. I have consecrated this temple, which you have built, to place my name there forever. And my eyes and my heart shall be there at all times. So we see that even if the temple is not there, the Lord said his name would be on that place forever, right? And his eyes and his heart would be there at all times. As for you, God speaking to Solomon, as for you, if you go before me as David your father went wholeheartedly and with uprightness to do in accordance with all that I have commanded you, and you will keep my statutes and laws, I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever. As I have spoken to David your father, saying, a man will not fail you upon the throne of Israel. And indeed, the throne, the monarchy of the nation of Israel, there would be later in Solomon's son, who was already, just not like his father and grandfather, and led immediately to a division in the kingdom and civil war, and the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Everything started to go wrong almost right away. But it is the Davidic line which has remained to be understood as the monarchy of Israel. We don't have a king now and haven't for 2,000 years. But when the Messiah comes, we understand that he will be a descendant of King David. So Solomon was able to establish the monarchy as David hoped and as God promised. Let's continue. But if you and your children turn away from following me, and you will not adhere to my commandments and my statutes, which I have placed before you, but instead you go and worship other gods and bow before them, then I will cut Israel off from the land which I have given to them. And this house, which I have made sacrosanct for my name, I will dismiss from my presence. And Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all nations. And this temple, which is exalted, shall become forlorn. And every passerby shall be astounded and will hiss. And they will say, why has the Lord done this to this country and to this temple? And they will be told, because they abandoned the Lord their God, who delivered their forefathers out of the land of Egypt, and took hold of other gods and bowed to them and served them. And therefore has the Lord brought all this retribution upon them. So the warning was right there from the outset. And it was at the end of 20 years, during which Solomon had built the two houses, the temple of the Lord and the king's house. And Hiram, the king of Tyre, which was a kingdom sort of Lebanon and Syria, had supplied Solomon with cedar wood and with cypress wood and with gold, as according to all his wishes. And then King Solomon gave Hiram in return 20 cities in the land of Galilee. Okay, then this chapter 9 goes on for a while, but it's listing sort of, the deals that Solomon is making with surrounding monarchs. all the tribute that is pouring in. Solomon is growing very powerful, very wealthy, very influential in the world, despite that he rules over a very small kingdom. Why does Solomon have so much power, influence, and wealth if he's the king of such a small land? Well, because God's hand is on Solomon and prospers him in all that he does. Now we go to chapter 10, which the Gemara on today's page is going to be citing. And it begins like this. When the Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's fame because of the name of the Lord, and she came to test him with riddles. He's like one of the most powerful kings in the world, and this queen from another land, and Sheba's meant to be like southern Arabia, is going to come and test him. Test him. Why would a monarch test another monarch with riddles? Because she had heard of his wisdom. And she came to Jerusalem with a very large retinue, with camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she spoke with him all that was in her heart. And Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was hidden from the king that he did not tell her. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all of Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the food of his table, and the seating of his servants, and the station of his attendants, and their attire, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he would go to the temple of the Lord, she was breathless. She was impressed with Solomon's bling, but she was more impressed with his wisdom. Verse 6, and she said to the king, it was a true report that I heard in my country of your deeds and of your wisdom. However, I did not believe the words until I came and saw with my own eyes, and I have beheld that not even a half of what had been told to me was the truth. You have wisdom and goodness, or other translation, you have wisdom and righteousness in excess of that which I have heard. Fortunate are your men. Fortunate are these your servants who always stand before you and listen to your profound wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who preferred to place you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's love of Israel forever, he appointed you as king to do justice and righteousness. And of course, Solomon would collect much of that wisdom into the book of Proverbs, as well as Koheles, Ecclesiastes, and bequeath that to us. So we still have this treasure of Solomon's wisdom. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold and very many spices and precious stones. There had never arrived such an abundance of spices as those which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Now that's what the Bible says about Queen Sheba. The sages would collect some Agadata and Midrash about this encounter between Solomon and Sheba. I mean, the Bible said she asked him riddles, and I certainly was wondering, well, what are these riddles? What is it that she, riddled him with? And so I have here a nice little piece from the Jewish Women's Archive about the Queen of Sheba, Midrash and Agada by a Tamar Kadari. And so she recounts that in the Midrash, the Queen of Sheba heard of King Solomon's great wisdom, and she declared, I will go and see whether he is wise or not, and I will test him with riddles. We just saw that. So she came, and she said to him, well, you are truly wise. Now I will ask you, if you are truly wise, now I will ask you something, and we shall see if you are capable of answering me. To which he responded, for the Lord grants wisdom. Knowledge and discernment are by his decree. If I'm able to answer you, it's no big thing of me. It's not thanks to me, it's thanks to God. Similar answer that Joseph gave to Pharaoh about interpreting dreams. And the Queen of Sheba asked, what are the 7 that issue and 9 that enter, the 2 that offer drink and the 1 that drinks? And Solomon didn't miss a beat, and he said, the 7 that issue are the 7 days of menstrual impurity. The 9 that enter are the 9 months of pregnancy. The 2 that offer drink are the breasts, and the child is the one who drinks. And the Queen of Sheba exclaimed, "You are truly wise. I will put another question to you, and we shall see if you can answer me." And he answered, "Well, for the Lord grants wisdom." And she said, "How can a woman say to her son, 'Your father is my father, your grandfather is my husband, you are my son, and I am your sister?" And Solomon replied, "These are the 2 daughters of Lot, who became pregnant by their father when they thought that the whole world had apocalyptic Armageddon." And when the Queen of Sheba saw that he solved her riddles, she brought before him children who were of the same height and who were in like attire. And she asked him, "Distinguish between the males and the females." And he made a sign to his eunuchs, his servants, who brought him nuts and roasted ears of corn. These are treats, which they scattered before the children. And the males, who were not bashful, collected them and tied them within the hems of their garments. The girls, however, were bashful, since their bodies would be revealed if they were to tie their undergarments, and therefore tied them with their outer garments. And Solomon told the queen, "These are the males and those are the females." And she told him, "You are exceedingly wise." She brings a few more of these kinds of riddles, demonstrations, asking him to on sight distinguish between who is circumcised and who is not circumcised. And he's able to, again, make a distinction through behavior. And then she says, "I did not believe the reports of your wisdom until I came and saw with my own eyes that not even the half had been told me. Your wisdom and wealth surpass the reports that I heard. How fortunate are your men." And so she quotes what we just read before. And according to the tradition, the Queen of Sheba's praise was mainly for the righteousness that she saw in Solomon's kingdom, which is why she ended with the words, "Fortunate is your kingdom, that he made you king, that God made you king to administer justice and righteousness." And so the Midrash relates that after hearing all of Solomon's wisdom, she proclaimed, "Praise be the Lord your God." And with this declaration, she expressed her desire to join the people of Israel. She converted to Judaism. And the rabbis compare the Queen of Sheba with Yisro, the father of Moses' wife, and after whom one of the Torah portions is named, namely the Torah portion that includes the giving of the 10 Commandments. So that really is a righteous Gentile who is honored in Israel, like the most you can be almost. And so Sheba's compared to Yisro. Where am I? And also she's compared to Rahav, who was when Joshua was leading Israel into the land of Israel, and their first challenge was at Jericho, and it was Rahav who understood that the Jews, it was inevitable that they were going to come in, and she helped Joshua's men escape from the king who was trying to kill them, and then they saved her when the army came in and took over Jericho. So Sheba's compared with Yisro and Rahav, 2 important Gentiles who sought to adhere to Israel. And the queen's visit to King Solomon is a fulfillment of a line in Jeremiah, "To you nations shall come from the ends of the earth and say, our fathers inherited utter delusions, things that are futile and worthless," particularly speaking of idolatry. And the queen came from the ends of the earth, and as a result of her stay with Solomon, came to believe in the Lord. And then this particular midrash of the queen's conversion may have led to the development of a literary tradition that appears in a later midrash, according to which Solomon married the Queen of Sheba, and she bore him a son named Ben Sira. And Ben Sira we've encountered before. There's a book of wisdom of Ben Sira that's not in the Bible, but that is sometimes cited by the sages. So that is one stream in the midrash about Sheba and how impressed she was with Solomon and the kingdom of Israel, and that she came and joined them. Now, Rashi disagrees with that midrash, or at least he brings an alternative midrash. And so when it says, where am I? And King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all her wish that she requested, aside from what he gave her according to King Solomon's ability, and she turned and returned to her land, she and her servants. So that's what the Bible says. So it would seem like this is the simpler reading than that she stayed, or maybe she converted to Judaism and then returned to her kingdom. But according to Rashi, on this verse, 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 13, Rashi says, and King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all her wish that she requested. This giving refers only to the teaching of wisdom that he gave the Queen of Sheba. But on the words all her wish, Rashi says that Solomon cohabited with her. And from this union was born Nebuchadnezzar, who would later, hundreds of years later, but at least in the mind of the sages, somehow this was possible. Maybe it was Nebuchadnezzar's grandfather or something, but at least issued the line that led to Nebuchadnezzar, who would do what? He would destroy Solomon's temple 410 years after it was built. So, competing streams, this is something that we often find, conflicting midrash or conflicting agadata. These don't have, of course they don't have the authority of scripture, but these tales and legends all contain some truth, if not literal explicit truth, certainly lessons that can be learned from these stories. So that's a little bit of background on the source that now the Gemara is going to bring on today's page for distinguishing between the types of gold that were available to be used in the temple. And the Mishna said, on all other days of the year, the golden vessels that were used, and specifically the coal pan, so the silver coal pan would take the hot coals from the outer altar. Some of them were transferred into a smaller gold coal pan, and that was brought into the sanctuary and placed on the inner incense altar, and then the incense would be burned on that twice a day, every day. But on Yom Kippur, they would use a special gold coal pan, and unlike the gold coal pan of the rest of the year, which was a greenish gold, the special Yom Kippur coal pan was a reddish gold. That's what the Mishnah says, and that's what triggers the discussion now we encounter in the Gemara. This is at the very bottom of the B side of page 44. The Mishnah states, on every other day, it was of greenish gold, but on this day, it was of a red gold. And Rav Chisda said, there are 7 types of gold mentioned in the Bible: gold and good gold, and the gold of Ophir, and glistering gold, and shahut gold, and closed gold, and parvayim gold. And so let me just mention, so we kind of knocked off, right? So I said that in terms of Sheba, she gave the king 120 talents of gold and very many spices, etc. Nobody ever gave as much spices as the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. The next verse, 11, also Hiram's ships delivered gold from Ophir, brought from Ophir a huge quantity of almug wood and precious stones. That's verse 11. That's where we get the gold of Ophir. And then glistering gold, so that's at 10:18. And the king made an immense ivory throne and overlaid it with glittering gold. That's here glistering, but the glittering gold of verse 18. And then there's the shahut gold, that's of verse 17. And 300 shields of beaten gold, 3 manes, which are 300 dinar, of gold he would put into one shield, and the king placed them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Right? At verse 16, it said, and King Solomon made 200 body shields of malleable gold. 600 dinar of gold he would put into one body shield. So it's like this armor made of gold for his elite soldiers. Okay, so that's from the Bible there. And then, so these are the types of gold that are listed. And it's not just different adjectives for the same gold. The sages are going to read into this that there are actually different kinds of gold, different grades and qualities and types of gold. And the Gemara explains the reason for these names. There is a distinction between gold and good gold. As is written in the verse, and the gold of that land is good, at Genesis 2:12, right? So the gold is good. So that means that there's other gold that is not as good. So there's gold and there's good gold, which indicates the existence of gold of a higher quality. Now, the gold of Ophir is gold that comes from Ophir. And the glittering or glistering Mufaz gold is so named because it resembles the luster of pearls, paz, in the way it glistens. Shahut gold is named as such because it is very malleable and is spun like thread, shenitiv kahut. And shalhut is a contraction of the words shenitiv kahut. Now, closed gold, closed is sagur, right? So that's the ahav sagur, the closed gold. And it is so called because when a shop opens to sell it, all the other shops close. That's closed gold. That's pretty good. As no one is interested in purchasing any other type of gold. That's closed gold. And parvayim gold is so called because its redness, the redness that we're talking about of the Yom Kippur coal pan, because its redness resembles the blood of bulls. And why all blood is red? Why are we talking about bulls? Because of the bull offering that's brought on Yom Kippur. Now, Rav Ashi said there are in fact only 5 types of gold. The last 5 in Rav Chisda's list, gold and good gold, there's only 5 types of gold. We said Rav Chisda said there were 7, gold and good gold, and then the other 5 types that were more specific. Says Rav Ashi, gold and good gold are not independent categories. Rather, each and every one of the types of gold has 2 varieties, regular gold and a superior variety called good gold. And that was also taught in a baraisa with regard to parvayim gold. On every other day, the coal pan was made of greenish gold. But on this day, it was made of red gold. And this is the parvayim gold, which resembles the blood of bulls. So there, this short exposition on the types of gold led us onto this beautiful journey to learn a little bit about how Solomon, sort of set up shop when he was the most wise and powerful and influential small kingdom in the world. And all the gold that was received from the surrounding territories as a tribute sent to him because of his wisdom. Wouldn't that be amazing, right? If people around the world would honor wisdom rather than, just good looks or other kinds of, kind of inherent abilities that don't necessarily benefit others. They're just attractive. Wouldn't it be great if the highest praise in the world today were reserved for wisdom? And what really is wisdom? Wisdom is the kind of knowledge and applied knowledge that enables people to live in peace and for people who are disenfranchised to become enfranchised, to create goodness in the world. That's what wisdom is. We continue. The Mishna states, on every other day, a priest sacrificed a peras, which is half of a maneh, of incense in the morning and a peras in the afternoon. But on this day, Yom Kippur, the high priest adds an additional handful of incense and burns it in the Holy of Holies. On every other day, the incense was ground fine, as prescribed by the Torah, but on this day, it was super fine. And the sages taught in a baraisa, the verse states with regard to the incense on Yom Kippur that it is finely ground aromatic incense. What does the verse mean to teach by this? Has it not already been stated, and you shall grind some of it finely, at Exodus 30:36? And the verse about finely ground aromatic incense is Leviticus 16:12. Why are there 2 separate verses talking about the grinding fine of the incense? It teaches that on Yom Kippur, the incense has to be super fine, right? So as much as it was the beautiful incense of every day, for Yom Kippur, they would just keep grinding it until it was just such a fine powder. Skip down just a little bit. The Mishnah states, where am I? Yeah. The Mishnah states on every other day, there were 4 arrangements of wood there upon the altar. But on this day, there were 5. I don't have my diagram here of the second temple, but one thing that you see in the diagram, I'll show it another time, is that the altar, the outer altar on which the offerings were brought, it was big, right? And we see in illustrations here in the Koran Talmud as well. I just don't have one handy. But imagine this ramp that leads up to the altar, and then the altar itself, like you could drive a car up that ramp, a wide body car. Like it's wide. The way it's usually drawn, it's like easily 10 men across could fit on that ramp. And the altar on the top is as wide as the ramp, maybe 15 men across, shoulder to shoulder. And so like up there, it's big. It's like a room. Like the top of the altar is about the size of my office here. It's a large space. It's not just, you walk up this narrow ramp and there's like a fire pit up there. It's like a room, like this room. And we really get a sense of that today. And this is why I'm reading this section of it. So on every other day, there were 4 arrangements of wood upon the altar, like 4 different wood piles that are burning up there. But on this day, there were 5. And the sages taught in the Tosefta. On every other day, there were 2 arrangements of wood on the altar, but on this day, there were 3. 1, the large arrangement, and 1, the second arrangement for coals for the incense, and 1, the additional arrangement of wood, which they add on that day for the incense that is burned in the Holy of Holies. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosei says, on every other day there were 3 arrangements, but on this day there were 4. 1, the large arrangement. This is on every other day of the year. This is where the offerings that need to be burned on the altar. And remember, like, especially on a holiday, there were a lot of animals being sacrificed in the temple, and they all needed to, at least the elevation offerings. The ola is an elevation offering, the burnt offering, which goes up in smoke on the altar. And so all these animals needed to be burnt up there. Like, so a little barbecue-sized fire is not going to cover it. It's a big, big bonfire up there. Where am I? So 1, the large arrangement, and 1, the second arrangement for the incense, and 1 for the upkeep of the fire, so that if the fire of the large arrangement begins to die down, they already have wood from the secondary arrangement that may be added to raise the flames. And 1, the additional arrangement of wood that they add on that day for the incense that is burned in the Holy of Holies. Rabbi Meir says, on every other day there were 4 arrangements of wood on the altar, but on this day there were 5. 1, the large arrangement, and 1, the second arrangement for the incense, another for the upkeep of the fire, and another for the burning of the limbs and fats that were not fully consumed on the altar the previous evening. They needed to dispose of that, and if they didn't have enough time to do it during the night, they had to keep burning it the next day. And 1, the additional arrangement of wood that they add on that day, on Yom Kippur, for the incense that is burned in the Holy of Holies. Now, the Gemara analyzes the different opinions. At any rate, everyone has at least 2 arrangements in their calculations. From where do we derive this? And the verse states that at least they all agree that there's a minimum of 2 wood arrangements, fires, on top of the altar on every other day of the year. How do we know this? The verse states, it is the burnt offering on the flame on the altar all night. That's Leviticus 6:2. And this is referring to the large arrangement. And it states further in Leviticus 6:2, and the fire of the altar shall be kept burning thereby. This additional mention of a fire is referring to the second arrangement, which is for the incense. And from where does Rabbi Yosei, because you don't want to pull the coals, right? That big fire, right? So it's like a barbecue. I mean, there's like animals being burnt on it. I mean, slaughtered animals, right? They've already been slaughtered, but either small whole animals or parts of larger animals. And so, when you make a barbecue, it's like all that grease is dripping down. You don't want to take coals from that fire to go into the sanctuary and then pour the fine incense on them, which is done every day of the year, twice a day. And then for the special coals of the Holy of Holies, even more so. So you have to have at least a second fire that's going to be for the coals for the incense. And from where does Rabbi Yosei learn about the additional arrangement for the upkeep of the fire? He derives it from the verse in Leviticus 6:5, and the fire upon the altar shall be kept burning thereby, which mentions fire for the third time. And how does Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that there are only two arrangements, explain this third mention of a fire? That additional mention comes to teach about the kindling of the thin wood chips, which are used to ignite the fires on the altar, as it was taught in a baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda would say, from where is it derived? That the kindling of the wood chips should be done only at the top of the altar, rather than setting them alight at the bottom of the altar and carrying them up. And the verse states, and the fire upon the altar shall be kept burning thereby, which indicates that the fire that is brought there has to be lit on the altar itself. And Rabbi Yosei said, from where is it derived that an arrangement for the upkeep of the fire is made? The verse states, and the fire upon the altar shall be kept burning thereby. And from where does Rabbi Yosei? Yeah, I'm almost done. So if you have comments or questions, get them in. And from where does Rabbi Yosei derive that the kindling of the wood chips should be at the top of the altar? Maybe it could be done not on top of the altar. He derives it from the same place that Rabbi Shimon derives it, as it was taught in a baraisa. The verse states, and the sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire upon the altar, which teaches about the kindling of the wood chips, that it may be done only by a fit priest and one who is robed in the priestly garments of service. This is a statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon said to him, there is no need for a verse to teach that a priest must kindle the chips, for could it enter your mind that a non-priest could approach the altar? Rather, this verse teaches about the kindling of the wood chips, that they may be lit only at the top of the altar. You can't start the fire that's going to become the fire on the altar. You can't start that off the altar, right? In other words, the priests have to light the fire on the altar. The initial kindling each day has to be done on the altar. And what would Rabbi Yehuda respond to Rabbi Shimon's reasoning? If this halakha is derived from there, I would have said a non-priest could light the fire on the altar by standing on the ground below and using a bellows to fan the flames at the top of the altar. Therefore, this verse teaches us that in all circumstances, the person kindling the fire must be a priest, and he must be standing on the altar when he kindles the fire that is lit there every day when the temple is standing. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. I'm pretty sure that I'm on my own in terms of handling the questions because Nina went to see our son's baseball game. Go Hawks. So let me just scan. It's going to take me a little bit since I have to actually read a little bit before I can answer questions. So give me a moment and let me see what I can pick up as I scan. So on my comment earlier that I learned today that shuckling, right, this motion back and forth when we pray, has been likened in the Zohar to the soul, which is the candle of God, sort of like a flame that's flickering on a candle. So when a soul is lit up, right, it has to sort of wave and shimmer like a candle flame. And that's what we want when we're praying. We want our souls to be lit up. So apropos of that comment, Bill says, well, I'm certain this is not why Jews rock while they pray, but I note that because I have ADD, and it's a habit I developed as a young man to keep my focus during longer prayers, kind of like being a human metronome. And that is definitely, yes, that is among the reasons given why Jews rock back and forth in their prayer, because it helps focus, it helps concentrate, it helps us stay in the moment in the prayer. So yes, your reason is also one of the reasons. Jeffrey says your depth and positivity is contagious. You are so sweet. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Beautiful. Sharon Fran Brooks says, a dear friend, a Holocaust survivor who got smicha in Poland, who became a rabbi in Poland before World War II, and one of the wisest men I know, taught me that we shuckle because the psalm says, all my bones shall praise you. Very good. And that is one of the other reasons that are given. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sharon, on behalf of your friend. It's good. People having conversation back and forth. I'm just scanning for questions. So let me see. Bill is talking about Sheba. And as we saw, we had some conflicting accounts of who Sheba was and what her destiny was after she visited Solomon. And Bill comments, that's interesting because the dynasty that ruled Ethiopia for several centuries named themselves Solomonids because they traced their lineage to Menelik, the son of Sheba and Solomon. And of course, Ethiopia is the home of the Beta Israel Jews, so it isn't as if that's just a particular theory that the royals promoted. Right, very interesting. Michael Diamond, is it possible for there to be a set time just for the daf? Yeah, look, I'm always doing a little bit of Torah at the beginning. So usually that takes about 3 to 5 minutes. And today took a little longer because it was directly tied to our daf. Brandon, something has always perplexed me about the character of Solomon. He was considered to be the wisest man alive and righteous. How is it that his wisdom did not protect him from falling into idolatry? We know that in his later years, he allowed his many wives to erect shrines in high places to their gods and idols. Do any of the sages explain why his wisdom failed him in his old age? Yeah, that is addressed. Absolutely, it is addressed. I don't remember the reasons offhand. I know I've encountered it in the Talmud. I think that the bottom line explanation on that is he got old. He got really old. But the thing that he didn't do, and which led him, sort of made him vulnerable to this is, the Torah says, don't multiply wives. Solomon multiplied wives. Don't multiply horses. He multiplied horses. So, despite all of his wisdom, what can I say? It's not my role to judge and badmouth Solomon. I'll let the sages do that when they do that. But Solomon was not perfect. I mean, neither was David, and neither were any of our patriarchs. He himself never fell into the ways of idolatry, but I mean, he had so many wives, and at a certain point, he became so old and weak, he wasn't able to control everything that was going on around him, and that happened, and there was a price to pay. Ryan says, so basically 10 golds? Right, very good. So 5 types of gold, but each can be gold or good gold. So in that sense, there's 10. Very good. Matt Milner. Oh no, you're talking. You guys are talking with each other. Very good. Was this weird? Yeah, Steve Ribbage. Where did I read that fine ground incense was burnt as atonement for nasty gossip? Right here, yesterday. We talked about that. That the incense atones. The incense, which is burned in secret, as it were, because it's done when the high priest is alone in the sanctuary, atones for the sin that is usually done in secret, gossip, slander, which is usually not, shouted from the rooftops, but we just tell our good friend, hey, did you hear? Right? And that's a nasty sin. And so this idea that the incense atones for Lashon Hara comes from that idea. Okay. That is what I've got for us today. It's fantastic learning with you, my holy sisters and brothers. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time for Daf Mem Vav, page 46. Look for that tomorrow. May you always be growing in wisdom, in kindness, and good health. All the best. And don't forget about the Shabbos challenge starting this week. Unplug. Plug into prayer, plug into wisdom, plug into scripture, plug into your family and your friends, unplug from technology and plug into what's really important in life. And if you're Jewish, add some mitzvahs too, like lighting candles, Kiddush, hey, wherever you are, up it a little bit of a notch. How about that? Okay.